What is going on, guys, and welcome back to week 4 of the NFL season, where we were blessed by the NFL gods with the best broadcast I have ever seen. And yes, I'm talking about the Toy Story game between the Atlanta Falcons and Jacksonville Jaguars that was broadcasted on ESPN+. And man, was it a ride. Now, before I get too serious on my critiques of this broadcast, I want to make it very clear that I understand that I was not the target audience for this broadcast. This was really targeted for children and just getting a younger audience involved in the game, which I do think is pretty cool, and frankly, I think they did a pretty solid job of, but man, was it something. Again, like I said, great for the kids. They did a really good job explaining the rules, so if you had like zero NFL knowledge, it was actually a kind of good broadcast to watch because it kind of gave you all the basics of what the NFL really is. As for the broadcast itself, if you saw any of the previews or even seen anything on Twitter today, you saw that the game was practically an animated version of the live game that was going on. They took everything that was happening on the field in real time, animated it, and then put it in like virtual reality in like Andy's room. And the idea of it is actually really cool, but the execution just wasn't really there. Again, I understand it was probably super experimental and you can't mocap every single player that's on the field, so I'm sure the animation was also experimental. A funny thing I did see though is that they did end up mocapping the announcers for the game. They actually put a behind the scenes picture up and everything, and they just look insane, but it is kind of funny to see. But they really took this Toy Story thing and ran with it. There was a lot of Toy Story involved throughout the entire game. Every time the ball would move or like a team would get a first down, the claw would actually drop the ball down on the line of scrimmage. So it was really cool to see them incorporate that because that is just such an iconic Toy Story type of thing. Also, probably the most involved character of Toy Story in this game was probably Slinky Dog, who was the chains. Instead of having line judges, because why the hell would you have line judges in Andy's room, it was Slinky Dog measuring how far a team had to go to get the first down. Probably one of the funniest things about having Slinky Dog on the broadcast is that, of course, every time a player would advance the ball, he would move. But the funniest thing was when a team got a penalty. And boy, did we get a show, because Slinky Dog backed that thing up. Also, just another funny thing, I was tweeting this picture all day because I thought it was hilarious. The broadcast didn't create any animations for like the referees or anything like that. Like, refs just didn't exist in Andy's room apparently, but you could hear them on the broadcast. So every single time a player would get a flag and the ref had to come out and make the call, they would just cut to Slinky Dog staring into the camera with soulless eyes. It was kind of terrifying, but also kind of funny.
Yo, it's a me, Slinky Dog.
They had a bunch of other little things, like every time a flag was thrown, it'd cut over to this animation of the bunny from Toy Story 4, I believe. To fill time, they would cut away from the field and show these little animations of Toy Story characters doing things. Like the aliens from the claw machine would like bounce a ball between each other, kind of imitating a soccer header. Woody and Jesse were doing some swinging dancing, I don't even know, but he yeeted that girl. Bo Peep pulled Woody's string, which I thought was illegal. There were just a bunch of little Toy Story gimmicks and stuff incorporated into this game that did make it enjoyable to watch, and I can totally see why parents would have enjoyed this because it sounded like it did get a pretty good reception from parents with children. So in that sense, I do think the NFL succeeded in getting a younger audience involved in caring about the sport. There were a couple other things in this broadcast that just had me dying laughing. For instance, for some reason, they compared Arthur Smith to Duke Kaboom. Like, they legitimately had a side-by-side comparison of them. They had their profession, what type of mustache they had, their profession, their mustache, I can't say this word, dude. Profession, mustache style, mustache. They had their, dude, this is tough. They had their profession, mustache style, and their hometown. Really nothing else to compare, so I'm impressed they got that far.
England is my city.
Last but not least, I tweeted about this and it actually got quite a few likes, but at one point there were a bunch of UFOs that started flying over the field, and somehow that led to talking about Aaron Rodgers' UFO sightings, and then Booger McFarland on a children's broadcast thought it was a bright idea to state that Rodgers was still on that ayahuasca. Now, I'm not going to explain what ayahuasca is, you can go ahead and do a quick Google search, but safe to say that's probably not something we should be promoting to children. Now on to the critiques. This shit sucked. I mean, not really, but it was very glitchy, and there were just a lot of things that weren't smooth. Literally, like when the broadcast started, we were just sitting there watching Drew Carter and Booger McFarland talk because there were some technical difficulties and they couldn't show the players on the field. They probably said sorry for the technical difficulties at least like 5 to 10 times within the first quarter. Like I said, there were a lot of problems. The tracking wasn't too great. There were times where the play was super zoomed out and you really couldn't see what's happening. And a lot of the times you really couldn't tell what was happening. It was fun to watch, but it wasn't accurate. There'd be like this touchdown pass and you couldn't really see if it was a touchdown or not because the ball would just freeze in midair or just disappear, and you'd have to wait for the call on the broadcast to actually know what happened or not. It even got to the point where I double boxed the normal broadcast just so I could actually see what was happening on the field. The ball thing was just the worst, I would say, though. The ball wouldn't show bounces, and anytime the ball hit the ground, it would just freeze. So say there's a kickoff and he kicks the ball and then it bounces on the 20 and rolls down to like the 10-yard line, the ball would stay stuck at the 20-yard line where it initially hit the ground. So there really wasn't any way of accurately telling where the ball was. That alone made it super hard to gauge passes or kicks and made it pretty damn hard to watch. Like I said, sometimes the ball would randomly move or just disappear altogether, and we're left wondering what the hell actually happened. At one point, Drake London had a late, almost touchdown and then dropped it, but I really had no clue what had happened until they said it. Also, I feel like I just have to say this, Drake London scored a touchdown in London. How can you not be romantic about football? The play on the field wasn't really anything too special. I will say this, Bijan Robinson is incredible. I feel like we all knew this. Dude is the bright spot on an Atlanta Falcons team that also has a bunch of other good players, but their quarterback is just not it. Desmond Ridder is not it. It's a crime that Kyle Pitts didn't get targeted more in this game. Kyle Pitts, in a Toy Story sense, is deadass a collector's item that hasn't been unboxed. Dude gets negative usage. It's pretty damn impressive. The Falcons ended up dropping the game and the Jaguars won 23-7, but just watching the Toy Story broadcast, it was kind of hard to watch. It was enjoyable, it was entertaining, but if you wanted to know what the actual was happening, you weren't gonna watch the Toy Story broadcast. You were gonna turn on the normal one, and that's exactly what I did at one point. Like I said, I did watch the entire Toy Story broadcast, but I couldn't just watch that if I wanted to know what happened in this game. Also, it helped that the Toy Story broadcast was probably a minute and a half off of the normal broadcast. I mean, it really makes sense. You gotta animate all that stuff and then render it out and then put it on live television, so makes sense that there was a delay. I'm not opposed to the NFL continuing to do this stuff that targets a younger audience and try to get more people involved in the game, but it really does need to be polished up because it looked like a goofy ass video game or like a knockoff Madden minigame type thing. Like I said, it wasn't that great, but we've seen this tried before. Disney tried it back in March for the NHL at a Capitals at Rangers game. It was NHL Big City Greens Classic, and it was also all animated and just looked super goofy. I'm just not totally in love with the fully animated gimmick. I think it could be done much better and done with a lot less. For instance, it already has been. The NFL had another type of broadcast that targeted a younger audience last season, but it wasn't with Disney, it was with Nickelodeon. Now, if you remember watching those broadcasts, it wasn't fully animated, but more of like an augmented reality type thing where they use these animations to overlay what was actually happening on the field. Yes, the graphics were different, they had a bunch of cutaways explaining the rules of football like Disney did, and there was even a bunch of virtual slime that exploded everywhere every time there was a touchdown. It just felt like it was a lot better of a product in my opinion, and it felt like people were actually invested in it, even if it was kind of just a meme. Nickelodeon had the MVP and it legitimately became a thing. Like Mitch Trubisky won it at one point and everyone was just geeking that Mitch Trubisky was the MVP. Also, players would just get slimed when they get the trophy, and it was just a super cool gimmick that I don't see Disney being able to pull off with the Toy Story thing. Personally, I'd much rather see a method similar to Nickelodeon's that we saw with Disney. I don't think it was terrible. I think they did the best they could with the technology that's presented to them, but it was just glitchy and I think it could have been done a lot better. I don't think the Toy Story game was the worst thing I've ever seen, but there were a lot of flaws that made it kind of hard to watch, honestly. I get it, I'm a 23-year-old critiquing on a children's broadcast. This is my life at this point, but I feel like there were a lot of things that I would like to see done better if they do it again. again in the future. Like I said, I do know that it's for children. It's a cool format to kind of get a younger audience involved, but for anybody that cares about the actual football game and seeing what's actually happening on the field, you probably don't want to watch the Toy Story broadcast.